welcome to the Psych and Business Podcast, where we highlight the integration of psychology and psychological principles into the world of business and organizations. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde. So today we have a really special series that we're starting on leadership, and we're going to be focusing on transitioning of leaders, so transitioning to leadership and management. And we're going to be focusing today on leading yourself. But before we dive into that, I want to introduce you to Dr. Connie Schroyer, who is a former guest. And so if you have not heard Connie's episode, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to that individual episode because it was fantastic. But today, Connie is going to be kicking off the series. And so, Connie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back, Ernest.
Awesome. Connie, I want you, before you dive into your section, talk a little bit about the series, talk a little bit about how and why you developed the series and why you think this is so important for transitioning leaders.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think that it's, as you think about leadership, there's a lot of people sometimes just get thrown into it. Sometimes there's training and that's great. But sometimes people are just really good at what they do and says, hey, would you like to lead? Someone says, would you like to lead other people?
Yeah.
Like, what the heck? So what we've tried to do, myself and my colleagues who you're going to be hearing from presenting on the other modules, is to really think about what are the components of effective leadership. So one is, and oftentimes people don't think about this, leading yourself. How do you need to show up? So that's the first module that I'm going to talk about. And
most people skip that. They don't even think about that.
Don't
right?
even
They just
think about
the next
themselves.
one. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, really important. And sometimes, you can show up and your natural style and capabilities, work great. You still need to be conscious about how you lead others. Sometimes you have to manage, some things a bit. So that's the leading self. Then there's the leading others, right? So how do you manage performance and people and hold people accountable and get work done through other people as opposed to just doing it yourself. So that's the second one, like managing.
Yeah,
leading.
and we're going to have Dr. Marlene Thorne talk about that one. So that's going to be fantastic as well. Yep.
Yeah. And then, the last one is just you are leading, an organization, or you are a leader in an organization. So leading or managing in organizations is the third one. It's how you do more of the strategic and the business and the financial and employee engagement and those sorts of things.
Yeah. And we're going to have Dr. Dee Ramsell talk about that, and she's perfect for that as well. So it's going to be such a great series, and I'm so glad that you've all agreed to do this. So thanks for that introduction. Let's dive right into leading yourself, because I think, again, as you mentioned, this is one of the things that's critical, but I think a lot of people forget about the fact that they've got to lead themselves and really attend to themselves. So let's dive right into that one.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so just to kind of frame it, in the first module around leading self, it really is about, it's a lot about emotional intelligence. And I know you've talked about this before in other podcasts. I talked about it on my prior one, but it is, first of all, about really knowing what you bring to the role of leading other people in general, or leading people in your particular role that you're in. So it is a lot about building that self-awareness, which is the first component of emotional intelligence. And then it's also about how do you manage, then either manage up what you need to do more of, maybe that you may not naturally do, or manage down. So it's managing yourself. And then how do you also think about what environment you're creating for other people. So we talk a lot in leading self about being very conscious about creating positive emotional energy and climate or environment so that other people get what they need to perform. And that in and of itself is a lot. And so in the course, we go through the components of emotional intelligence. We include an assessment of leadership style. We include, it's a called learning style, which is generally available for people who want to go and learn a little bit more about their overall style. And I can talk a little bit more about specifically what that measures. There's lots and lots of assessments out there around style and impact and leadership competencies. So lots of them. I chose this particular one for a reason, to give people a little bit of self-awareness. But also I think the module talks about how on an ongoing basis, the need to just constantly get feedback and
Hmm. Hmm.
better understand your impact and what others need, and continually assessing what is it that I need to, manage up, manage down, do more of. So we also talk a lot just about that process of how you do
Hmm.
that as a leader. So I would say that those are probably the primary areas that we cover in the course.
Now, Connie, let me ask you about what you're talking about in terms of self-awareness, because I completely agree that that's really important. But I find that a lot of leaders lack self-awareness, right? And you've described a couple of ways in which you can do that is by taking some of the assessments that gives you some information about your behavior and just increase your self-awareness. But another way is also asking for feedback from other people. And I've found from time to time that leaders are sometimes afraid to ask for that feedback, right? They're afraid of what they might hear. How have you seen that at all, and how do you deal with that?
So yeah, it's some people are just, I think, naturally hungry for
Hmm.
feedback and will ask it and go out and just naturally say how did I do and what could I do differently. The challenge is, I think, especially as people go into leadership positions and go into higher and higher leadership positions, is people are sometimes afraid or nervous to give true, honest feedback. Right? Oh,
Yeah.
boss, you're great. Yeah, everything is wonderful. Right? So I think that, part of creating the right environment and part of the whole, emotional intelligence framework is really knowing, how to show up in a way that builds trust so that people
Hmm.
aren't fearful of giving feedback. And there are formal ways through 360s and other ways, but ideally you want to create a learning environment
Hmm.
where you're being vulnerable, and that's sometimes one of the parts of emotional intelligence that's very difficult, is to actually say and show some vulnerability and to say, I probably don't know as much about this as maybe
Yeah.
some of you here, and so I need your feedback, I need your help, I need your input. All of those sorts of things are really important, but sometimes it's hard to be vulnerable. But lots of research says that's what really builds trust and creates that climate where people do give feedback. They might disagree, they might put forth alternative points of view. And, like I said before, it's part of it is knowing what you bring as a leader through all these variety
Hmm.
of assessments. What's your style? What's your approach? Are you someone who's a very, you know, fast thinker, fast doer, takes input, makes a decision? Are you someone who's
Yeah.
more of a reflective, or collects a lot of data and maybe slower in decision making? And knowing, that others might have different styles, and that you
Hmm.
actually need a diversity of styles when you're working in a team to be effective.
Yeah, I love that approach, that double prong approach. That that the assessments gives you that some of that objective information to help you build that self awareness. But then you're also asking for feedback from others, which gives you some of that reputation, right? So it's not just about what you think of yourself, but how others are seeing you as well, to really round off that self awareness.
Yeah. It's that combination. And one of the techniques that we use in the class, or just model or frameworks, is the Johari window, which
Hmm.
I love because, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, if you create kind of a 2 by 2 grid, right? What is
Yeah.
known to me, known to self, what is not known to me or self, and then what is known to others and what is not known to others, right? So you have these 4 boxes.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, well, first of all, let's talk about, what typically there are things that other people know about us that we don't know
Hmm.
about ourselves. Those are blind spots. And so
Yes.
in the course and in life, it's always helpful to know your blind spots.
Hmm.
And oftentimes they are your strengths taken to the extreme. And I think especially when people are going into leadership roles, right?
Yeah.
They will keep doing what got them to where they are, what made them
Yes.
successful. Maybe a lot of achievement, perfectionism, knowing how to do things, fast, quick problem solving, all those sorts of things.
Results oriented.
Yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, exactly. And so others might, especially if you're new to the role and haven't, gotten feedback yet, this is, there are lots of blind spots, but one common one is, well, I'm just going to continue doing that. And so you end up solving everybody else's problems around you. You don't empower, you don't engage, you don't make people feel that they're trusted, all sorts of impacts, which are completely unintentional, but just sort of
Hmm.
happen. just natural course of you being who you are. So one of the techniques is, back to your point about getting feedback, is to try to reduce your blind spots by being open and getting that feedback. The other, though, interesting way of using this Johari window is if you look at the part that is known to you but not known to others. That's
Hmm.
more the private, what private self. And in some cases, people don't want to necessarily reveal these things. So it's one thing to go through all these types of assessments and learn about yourself and whether you're, an introvert or an extrovert, or whether you're someone who's super conscientious or not, or super high on, uh, you know, dominant scale, or whatever it
Yeah.
is, right? But then what do you do with that? And so, the recommendation is to always sort of disclose it, be very
Hmm.
transparent, that I know that this is my style and I know that I can come across this way. So if I'm being too much like this, too dominant, or too, I can be, for example, if you're someone who likes analysis and doesn't feel comfortable making a decision without lots of data, say, I know that this is it can be a strength, but this is my
Hmm.
tendency. So if you're bringing something to me that needs a fast, quick decision, you know, say, hey, this might be a situation where we may not want to go out and collect more data yet. We need to make a
Yeah.
decision. If we make the wrong one, we can change it. But say that to me because I won't necessarily uh, go that route. And so that's an example of where disclosure actually reduces your private self, makes it more public, which is what's known to you
Hmm.
and known to others. And the really effective leaders, there's that sense of just openness about who I am and what I'm bringing. Doesn't mean I just bring everything that's on my mind and in my brain, and that's where we get into some of the self-control issues. But I love the Johari window as a technique.
Yeah, I love the Johari window as well. I've used it a few times, and I really appreciate the quadrants there. I think what really resonating with me, what you're saying here in terms of disclosure, is that it's really critical to share what you know about yourself to your lead, to your team, to the people that you're working with, so that they can have a better sense of who they're working with as a leader, right? So they can understand your tendencies and your perspectives, and then know and have a discussion around, okay, here's what my tendency might be, please bring it to me, or please talk to me and let me know if you're seeing this or that. The other thing I think also comes up in disclosure a lot is the sense of doubt, right? I think sometimes leaders have this sense of doubt that they don't know, they don't have the answer, they don't know the solution, and they feel like that can't be right. As a leader, they have to have all the answers, and so they refuse to disclose that. And I think by disclosing that, it really opens up that, hey, it welcomes other people's input and lets them know that, hey, other people can have the answer as well. I'm not the only person who needs to have the answer.
Yeah, and one of the pieces of advice that I give, especially early leaders, is to say, learn how to ask the right questions to help
Mm,
people come up with their own answers. The earlier that you learn that versus feeling like you have to come up with all the answers, it's kind of like the coaching style. You're
yeah.
kind of guiding someone through a process of self-discovery for themselves,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then they don't hopefully come to you for all the answers. That's not what you want. You want people to, maybe as a leader, they should be thinking differently, and you've had more experience than them, or you have access to what's going on higher up in the organization than they do. So it doesn't mean you necessarily use that knowledge and experience to come up with the answer, but you can use it to ask really good questions to help
Hmm.
people see things differently, have insights, be able to explore things maybe in a different way. And that technique is one of the really most valuable leadership styles around, that coaching style that really helps
Yeah.
drive performance. It helps drive engagement. It helps people to develop all those great things that you want.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really great approach as a leader to tap into those resources that you have, and also it helps to empower them, right? It empowers them to do their work and to be able to come up with some of the answers as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think the other thing that we cover in the program, which is really impactful, is, so there's, if I just think about emotional intelligence, there's the self-awareness component,
Hmm.
but then there's the self-management component as well. And we do spend some time, and I think it's important for people to think about when are the times when you're not at your best, and
Mm.
what can what are the triggers, what's the reaction, because the more frequently we can manage those things, then we can usually show up as a better person, a better leader, and create the right environment for our people. So we use a technique and phrase that, I think originally was coined by Daniel Goleman and Richard Boyatzis around the amygdala hijack exercise,
Mm.
emotional self-control
Yeah.
exercise. And it's where we do things that we don't sometimes even know why we do or say or react in a certain way. And that way can be anger. It can be impatience. It can be, some people react very sarcastically to certain ways. It can be sometimes shutting down and going and just, I'm done with this person. I'm not having anything to do with you. I'm going to go off and just do it myself or not deal with you anymore. I mean, there's all sorts of reactions that people have. And, granted, sometimes they're logical and rational, but oftentimes it's because it's triggering something. And so the
Hmm.
more that people can begin to see what is triggering them, and what consistently happens, and to know how to deal with it in an appropriate way. I mean, if someone is doing something that is rude or inappropriate, to be able to hold that person, hold their feet to the fire and say, hey, when you said that, it had this impact, without getting the emotional reaction. And so one of the things that's often measured in a 360 around emotional intelligence is that self-control and that ability to keep calm,
Yeah.
and to even if you're not feeling calm, or if you're feeling a certain way inside, to be able to show up in a way that's having the right impact. So we spend a little bit of time on the emotional self-control, learning how to manage internally,
Hmm.
and then also how to just make sure you're showing up. You're not, for example, multitasking or back to back in meetings, or all those things that, you're dealing with stressors, you're whatever it is that, gets you into a better place to be able to deal with others and what may be coming at you, and to be more present and more aware. So we talk
Hmm.
about ways of doing that in the leading self, which is really important.
Yeah, I love how this builds on itself, right? Because you start off with self awareness, making sure that you're understanding your tendencies, understanding your behaviors and your actions, and then you move into self management. Now that you have this understanding, what do you do with it? What are the actions that you need to take in order to make sure that you're managing your behavior, and making sure it's appropriate. And so it's building on itself to helping you not just understand yourself, but also do something about it as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then I think the other important component that we cover, do the self-awareness, the self-management, is the social side of it, right? The social awareness. And that's just learning to pick up on cues, learning just effective listening, like really
Hmm.
deep listening, not just listening to the words, but listening, looking for the cues, the body language, the tone, and even listening deeply for empathy, and
Hmm.
trying to be attuned. We use the word attunement, like how do you get attuned with your people. And you
Hmm.
probably felt it, we all have, where someone has come out and the mood has been, maybe after a layoff or after something negative has happened, and manager comes out, leader comes out in this raw, very positive. People are just like, this is not resonating with us right now,
Yeah.
right? So again,
Yeah.
it's
Like
very
read the room, right?
yeah, read the room. Exactly. And it doesn't mean that you also that it's not the opposite either. It's not that you come out and say, I know it's horrible, it's gloom and doom, it's bad. But
Hmm.
if you use empathy effectively to recognize just how people must be feeling, or ask people how they're feeling, right? Even better, ask them, what's going on for them. And then address it in a way that says, these are, with empathy, these, I can tell this is having an impact on you, and your ability to focus or to feel good about where we are right now, whatever it is. And to say something like, and I'm committed to understanding at a deeper level and taking action to try to make some of the changes. Can't change what happened in the past, you have to admit what you can and can't change, But and then of course you have to follow through with that. So that attunement and that deep listening is a skill that I think just in everyday life is really important. But talk about the
So,
how you do that.
so this is an interesting one because when we're talking about the social cues and the social environment, you have to firstly be able to read those cues, right? You have to be able to understand the social environment that you're in and understand how people are the cues that they're giving you in terms of the behaviors and things like that. But then you're also talking about being able to respond to those appropriately, right? So how does someone who doesn't have the training that we have as psychologists, how do they start to learn how to read those cues and interpret them appropriately?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, it's about being present, really, really being present, not
Hmm.
multitasking, not thinking when you should be listening to what other people are saying or going on. So
Hmm.
whatever it takes for you to be fully present. I think if you're not someone who does this naturally, some people just do it more naturally than others. It's okay to
Hmm.
ask for help. You probably have someone on your team in your peer group who sees a lot. Maybe you have a
Hmm.
couple people who just see things, notice things, read the room better if you're not someone who does it naturally. So I think
Yeah.
rely on trusted friends, team members, peers, whomever to say, how did that go over, or even give permission in the moment, right? This is one of the things around, I think I talked about this a little bit last time around teams and setting
Hmm.
norms for teams. It's okay to kind of stop me and say, "You're moving on. We're not there yet,"
We're
or
not ready.
whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Hmm.
We need you to come back, or I don't think there's complete agreement, or we don't feel good about this. To say, whatever it is. So part of it is setting that environment, and then to your point, once you do see a cue, if you don't understand it or you're not sure what it means, just say, I'm sensing that something's going on right now, or
Hmm.
what is going on for you, or what's happening right now. I'm not quite sure. I noticed a facial expression, and sometimes it's happened to me. And be like, oh no, I'm just thinking. I'm with you, but I'm just well, that's okay. I appreciate that in that moment someone recognized that I might be feeling a certain way, and they said,
Yeah.
"Ooh, what's that face?" Or, are you not there yet, or whatever it is. So I think learning to just check in with people, even norms
Hmm.
around, it's been a busy week and we're here we are on a Friday morning, we've got a meeting. Let me just go around and just check in. Is everyone feeling today? So you can put in place norms and processes like that to do it if you're not someone who necessarily picks up on those cues.
Hmm. Yes, I love the way that you're providing these tips for people who this doesn't come naturally to, right? You're saying lean on other people who have this ability, or put in place some processes, make it okay, make it acceptable for people to come to you and kind of make it clear how they're feeling.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's really, I mean, this one, I would say that the other modules probably cover a greater variety of topics.
Hmm.
This one covers probably fewer topics, but it goes pretty deep into those topics. So it goes deep
Hmm.
into the self-awareness, into the amygdala hijack, and so forth, into the social awareness. We talk about do an exercise around just common listening blocks that people have, and some of the things that people can do to improve some of the listening. We also talk a little bit about, I don't think I've touched on this yet, but that when you look at the self-awareness,
Hmm.
that it's not just about your style or your personality or your competencies, that you also want to go deeper into things like your life goals, your values,
Hmm.
sometimes even. So because I've seen things like one example many years ago of someone I was working with who had a really strong integrity value, for instance,
Hmm.
and you wouldn't necessarily pick that up on any assessment tool per se, because most people have integrity, to a good degree if they're in the workforce and been successful. I would hope so. Right.
Yes. Yeah, you hope so. Yeah.
For this individual that I'm thinking of in particular, and he was very, he would be very quick to make a judgment if he felt that someone was not telling him the truth. And so it was really impacting his emotional intelligence and ability to present himself. And he, had gotten to be up to be a fairly senior leader in this organization. And so, there's sometimes a process of self-reflection where you have to look at and say, what is it that I very strongly held values or beliefs? And how do I make sure that I'm not over judging or over, processing that to the point where if someone, for example, with him, if someone was inconsistent, one week would say something and the next, meeting might say something else. Well, I'm not even dealing with that person anymore because they totally said something different this week than next week, and not even thinking that maybe the person had new information, had changed their mind for a very good reason. And so this is where the self awareness around when you're feeling a certain way inside, to check it, right? To check it and say, help me understand. I heard you say this last week. Now I hear you. Don't make an assumption. Has something happened that has changed your perspective?
Yeah.
Assume positive intent. Don't make assumptions. When people are saying things or doing things, and it happens all the time. So I think that's something that as people, we learn very shorthand ways sometimes of making, decisions or categorizing, or do I trust this person or not? But there's an added responsibility, I think, when you are, especially when you're leading other people and you're responsible for them, that you try to bring out the best in them. And I think that's, if I had to kind of say, how does this whole thing kind of wrap up and end, if you will, it is around thinking that, every interaction you have with an individual, whether that person works for you or not, but there's an added responsibility when you're, when it's a team member, they're going to leave that interaction feeling emotionally better or worse. So your gauge is not all these metrics and KPIs that organizations use to measure your success. What is going to determine whether you're able to get your people rallied around driving that success is whether
Yeah.
you leave them feeling more capable, engaged, fulfilled, aligned with them, whatever it is. And there's a strong emotional component
Yeah.
to
And I think that's so important, especially as a leader, when you're talking about self-awareness. It's so important because you bring a lot of yourself to that interaction. You bring a lot of yourself to that engagement with that other person. And so if you're not aware of what you're bringing even, or what's impacting you and how it might be causing you to behave, you're not going to be aware of how how you're causing that interaction to fail, or to be challenging for that other person.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, Ernest, when I talk about this, people say, well, wait a minute. First you said, be yourself, learn about yourself, be yourself, disclose. Now you're saying, don't be yourself, like show up in a way that has a positive impact on other people. And I said, yes, it's not either or, it's and. Right. Yes, be yourself. We're all different people. Do not be somebody that you are not. But if there are things that the natural you does that de-energizes and makes people feel, you know, not in a positive way, in a more negative way, or certain types of people, just be aware of that and try to figure out how within your natural way of being that, you're creating the best possible outcome that you can. So it is a little bit of both of those, I guess I
Yeah.
would say.
And I think that's part of the role and the responsibility of
Yeah.
being a leader. As you know, as you said, your responsibility is to leave those people feeling positive, and feeling as if they can do the work. And so, if there's something that you're bringing to bear that doesn't cause that, or that conflicts with that, then it's your responsibility to check that, and to make sure that you're managing that as part of that self awareness and self management as a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, it's, I love, because Marlene always follows me on the leading others. And it's that you want to have the positive impact, but that is not the end goal. The end goal is your job is to get performance.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
there is a knack and there are techniques. So if people walk away feeling this is very touchy feely and doesn't really address performance, these are the puzzle pieces that you have to put together. That there are
Yeah.
times when you do have to hold people accountable, manage performance, be tough as a leader. Now, I would always say that
Hmm. Hmm.
there's always a way to be tough with empathy. People may not like
Yeah.
it at the end of the day. They may not like what you're saying. They may not like what you're hearing. So even if you're delivering a difficult message to someone, you're not performing, you're not cut out for this. It's, there's still a person that you're talking to there who,
Yeah.
is has strengths and will show up energized and as the right person in the right situation with the right people and so forth. So,
Yeah.
to me, it's more about how do you have empathy for, what might be happening, knowing that you also have a responsibility to lead and manage. And Marlene covers a lot more of those techniques and skills.
And even this, I think, is really important as we're talking about performance management, which I know Marlene will talk about. But I think even this, in terms of knowing yourself, because I know a lot of leaders, or I've known a lot of leaders who struggle with that aspect of leadership. They don't like engaging in conflict, and they don't like speaking about or doing things that they think might upset the other person. And so even knowing that about yourself, I think, is really important, because it plays into how you
Yeah.
try to help motivate and hold other people accountable to their work, right? So I think it's really important to understand that about yourself.
Oh, and that's another blind spot that a lot of people, sometimes especially new leaders, have, is they think, well, if I just continue kind of being friendly and friends and people, yes, I'm the boss, but I want them to like me, right? I don't want to
Hmm.
do or say anything that's going to upset them or create that distance. So you do oftentimes see that while that has advantages, if we're friendly with each other, that's great, but then you may not be, as tough or direct or say things that need to be said. And it can
Yeah.
also feel awkward sometimes if you're trying to coach. You know, sometimes you have to kind of step out of we're not peers, we're not friends. I do need to push you. Right. That is
Yeah.
part of what I need to do. So you have to be aware of that if that's a blind spot or a style that, you want to be kind of the friendly or the buddy leader, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's extremely important, especially when your job as the leader is to help to move your employees towards being efficient and performing a specific task. You have to be able to push them in an empathic way, but doing that as part of the role and the responsibility of leadership. And not every leader is comfortable with that, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Even some who've been leaders for a long time, the preference sometimes is I'd rather just go off and do it myself or get somebody else
Yeah.
to do it. And sometimes you'll hear that complaint. Well, it's so confusing because, my manager asked this other person to do exactly what he or she asked me to do. That's not a good feeling, right? Like I don't
Yeah.
I don't get it, and it just creates a lot of confusion, and it can create conflict and
Yeah.
competition, all of those sorts of things. But that is often a technique that people will use if they don't want to go back to the person and say, you know, this wasn't a good job. You need to work on this.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. Sometimes they'll take it and do it, or they'll give it to somebody else to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Connie, I really appreciate you talking through us through this module. I think it's, again, so important, but so very often overlooked. People don't focus enough on understanding themselves and building that self awareness and engaging that self management. So I think absolutely this is a really critical thing for leaders, especially leaders who are transitioning into the role and don't really have a good sense of what it is to be a leader. It's extremely important to spend some time on yourself, focus on yourself, and build a better self-awareness so that you can understand what you're bringing to those relationships. So really appreciate you talking about this during the module.
Yes.
Connie, how do people reach you if they want to follow on the conversation or reach out for your services to try to get help with this?
So they can reach me through my email. It's Connie.Schroyer, Schroyer, at thealeadership.com. It's THEIA, thealeadership.com. Or on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome.
I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay, great, fantastic. And then before we let you go, I always want to take advantage of the experts that we have on the show, as you remember. So specifically around leading yourself and understanding and building your self awareness. What's a tip that you have for the audience in terms of how they can really engage in that process?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've probably talked about it a lot, but I think it's getting feedback often and early.
Hmm.
To me, is the biggest tip I can give, and just look for those signs, and don't forget also to celebrate your what you do well, so you can keep
Hmm.
on doing it. So that's the other
Yeah.
thing is make sure to ask other people, what am I doing that is helping you to get things done? Keep doing that. Are there things like that I can be doing differently?
Yeah, I love that tip. I always say feedback is a gift, right? It's something that helps us to better understand ourselves and help us to make those necessary adjustments. So, ask for those gifts of feedback. I mean, that helps you to do better and to be better. So,
Yeah. And don't be too
Connie,
hard
again,
on
thank you so
yourself.
much for
That's the
coming on
other
the
thing,
show.
Ernest. Don't be too hard on yourself.
Don't be too hard on yourself.
Everybody has blind spots. Everybody has things that they need to work on. So don't beat yourself up about it, because I see people do that as well. So
Yeah, great advice. Connie, thank you again so much for coming on the show and for doing this series. I really appreciate it.
happy to do it, Ernest. Thank you.
Awesome. And to our listeners, I hope you will join us to listen in with Dr. Marlene Thorne and Dr. D. Ramswell afterwards.